Walk us on the way to see the world. Grab your brush and let's learn from the women who's got the skills. All gather around and all I use is step.
Hello everybody. I'm thinking of you from afar and hoping that you guys are staying well and that we are going to carry on as much as we can. I'll be having frequent contact with you by email, so just know that I'm just a computer away. And I also know that you guys, every single one of you, are very resourceful. This is probably one of my best millinery classes ever. When in doubt, look at that textbook. Denise Dreyer has the answers to a lot of things, plus a lot of pictures. But I did want to give you all additional handouts that I normally would have given if we had continued in person, face to face. As long as you send me your address, I will send these to you in snail mail. This first one is Millinery for the Masses, and it was an early article, and it has a fabulous picture of moi in my youth with Marcy Bethel, who has designed costumes on the West Coast for decades. We were both in our youth, actually. This is telling you how to make a sailor hat, which you already know, but I think once you see the photos, it might give you fond memories of our time together. This is an article on Panama hats, and he talks about what makes Panama hats high quality, what to look for, where they come from. You might think they come from Panama, but not necessarily. Then there's an article, I'm sorry it's not printed as well as it should be, but it's about sewing braided straw into hats. And this actually gets to be, if you just thumb through it a little bit more carefully, you will get to some clearer photos. This one is a little bit clearer. And then you get this, which is what you really need, which is showing you how to take that straw braid and make it into a hat by hand sewing the braid, curling it at the top of the hat, and then making it curve by curve. And they can be quite wonderful. You can get straw braid at millinery shops, and we'll be talking about that in another segment. I've got lots of handouts for you for your trims, your hat trims. Remember, we have a project that is ribbon trim and ribbon flowers. There's a wonderful chapter in Denise Dreyer's book that shows you some really wonderful basic looks for both ribbons and flowers. But I've got lots more handouts. This is one handout. This is a very interesting handout from a large book of Victorian flowers with millinery wire, and that might interest you. And then I've got some cockades here that are really fun as long as you have access to ribbon or grosgrain ribbon. I ordered a huge stock of grosgrain ribbon for you all that came in Friday. So if you dare to come back into the costume studio at some point during the next few weeks, and I don't mandate this at all, but I will have the grosgrain ribbon in the millinery cabinet that's right over there in a big bin that says grosgrain ribbon, and you're welcome to help yourself to it. Another thing that we were going to do, I'm not quite sure how we can do it at this point, and I'll just have to give you extra credit for this, is revitalizing old hats. We were going to take an orphan hat from stock and then revitalize it through cleaning it. And this handout tells you techniques for cleaning. It tells you techniques for brushing up felt and sandpapering felt to get rid of some stains. It tells you how to dye feathers and how to curl feathers, the ends of feathers. So, you know, I wish we could do demos of all this stuff. It's going to be challenging once Jacqueline leaves for Charlotte. And all I can say is try to read this and see what you come up with. Curling feathers is basically like curling ribbon when you curl for Christmas packages. It's basically the same thing. You take the edge of the ribbon while the feather is slightly wet. You can curl it with the edge of your scissor. Here's another handout on millinery bows, feather trims, and cabochons, etc. If you don't know what a cabochon is, then you can take a look at this handout and find out all about it. Here's a simple pattern for felt flowers. Anybody can do this. You cut out the felt in these various shapes, with one being larger, one being medium, and one being smaller. You put them all together and hey, you've got a felt flower. That might be something that you might want to experiment if you ever get to steam your hoods that you purchased. This is also another handout that I've always loved. It's creating authentic hats from Africa, and there's a variety of styles, and you might find that very helpful as well. Those are handouts that are coming your way by snail mail if you give me your address. And so I just wanted to show you very quickly some of the kinds of flowers that people have done in this class before. Here's a ribbon flower that's quite lovely, and it is actually connected to a solid buckram piece. This is just a circle of buckram that then all of this ribbon was attached to, and then you can attach it to your hat. But sometimes if the buckram is larger and it has to bear more weight of ribbon, sometimes people do millinery wire around the edge of the buckram. But in this case, you have this lovely example that I've always been fond of. Here's another example of doing ribbon in a different way, where you have the buckram base, and then you have this ribbon that is gathered or pleated, and there's a covered button in the middle. So I would call this a cockade. The French loved cockades in the late 18th century, and they especially loved it for their French Revolution. But you also see cockades in Victorian times and turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 1900s. Here's another ribbon example where it's just simple ribbon and the back. As is the case with all forms of materials in millinery, the more the material is natural fiber, the better it is at being steamed and stretched and shaped. This is a lovely tulip. I should have pressed it for you, but you can see how there's a hole. This fabric has been pleated, and then there's ribbon that's gone around it, so that it actually looks like, especially when it's pressed nicely, it looks like a tulip piece of ribbon. You know, there's so many creative ways to go with your flowers and ribbon trim. This is another one that's out of velour. Actually, I think it's velvet. Velvet is usually a little bit thinner and lightweight. But you can see that, well, you can't see, but what I can explain is that it has an underside in a taffeta fabric, and then the velour is on this side. The edges are raw, and then there's just been some glue to attach. I know glue, I said the bad word. There's some glue that's attaching this velvet to the underside, and then tie wire was inserted in here so that you can bend this any way you want. And that's kind of a neat shape. And then it's all attached. Each one of these petals is attached to millinery wire that has some ribbon wound around it. Makes a nice decoration on a hat, just like that. Silk organza is fabulous for flowers. And here's some silk organza here. What's so great about silk organza? It's stiff, and so the stiffness allows it to keep its shape. And so here's a petal. You know, I've got this explanation in your handouts. You'll just have to search for it. But, you know, the whole piece is cut out of silk organza, and then the edges have been burned. And as you burn the edges, you can see that the edges have a brown section to them. And by slightly burning the edges, then you don't have a raw edge. And then there's some tie wire that goes up the back of it so that you can have all kinds of, you know, stiffness and movement to it. So you might find that one to try at home. Again, if you're brave enough to come into school, you're welcome to take some, you know, some of the materials that we have here, as long as you don't take all of them, because other people might want to use them as well. This is just fabric. This is, how about that for daffodils? And it's just taffeta fabric. You can see that the raw edges actually give it a little bit of texture. And these patterns are just clustered together and then stitched in place. And then there's a piece of fabric that has been wrapped around. a piece of floral wire. This green wire is, it's like tie wire. It's just what florists use. Here is, again, this is a buckram base, but then this is fabric. This is actually a piece of fabric that's been folded in half, and then you just have a machine stitch to make one long, huge ruffle, and then you wrap that ruffle around and sew it onto the buckram base. This is another example of where just taking ribbon, and now this is polyester ribbon, so you're limited with how much exactly you can do with it, but you can see that even polyester ribbon can give you some nice effects. Sometimes you can get ribbon that has wire on the edges, on both edges. And that's nice because then that wire helps you to shape it in a variety of ways. So you might want to think in those terms. But these are just loops, like what you would do on a Christmas package, actually. And then you just stitch those down to your buckram base, and you've got a lovely cartouche of some sort. Here's another one. These are petals. You'll see in the handouts lots of ways to create these petals, but this is a polyester organza, but you can see that even the polyester organza can give you some nice shapes. It just won't stretch and steam and shrink and do all the wonderful things that natural fibers do. But you can see it's really quite lovely. And here's a cabochon, and this is also on a buckram base. If I had been this person, I would have stitched millinery wire around here to just, because when it gets this big, you know, you almost need a more solid base to keep that all intact when you've got it sitting on your hat. But you can see how this is, well, I don't know if you can see or not, but this is actually one huge piece of fabric that's, again, folded on the bias, and then it's clustered, it's shaped and clustered around this buckram base, and then a similar one is done with the yellow taffeta. You can see it all kind of coming together there in the center. It makes for a really lovely look, and I think this is very much like what you see hats doing in the 1906, 1915. You see a lot of cabochons like this, and I've got plenty of handouts that show you how to do this that I will send to you if you give me your address. Here's another one that's kind of interesting. Sometimes you want to decorate your hat with just a ruffled ribbon of some sort, or you want to curl the ribbon into something and shape it onto your hat. That would be one where it might be a flower trim or it might be a ribbon trim. That's up to you to define that, because it's using ribbon to make a flower. But some ribbon trim is just straight tailored ribbon trim that you put at the base of your sailor hat. You know, I think of ribbon trim as being the tailored way you use ribbon, whereas the flowers look like not real flowers, lovely superficial flowers. And here's just some more examples of fabric. These have all been wadded up in a bag, so I forgive me for showing you flowers that fall short of the glory of God. You can see a little bit of the tie wire right here that's helping to, again, this is two pieces of fabric laminated together with the tie wire in the center so that you can, shape those petals any way you want, because the tie wire is allowing it. Here is a lovely tulip, or what would you call that, a rosebud? I would call it a rosebud. You can see the shape of the leaf out of some green fabric, and there's been some tie wire that's been glued. And, get some millinery glue. Sobo glue works well. We've used Sobo glue before. But get a glue that's good, that sits on fabric without getting too hard. So you can see that this tie wire is just helping to shape that leaf, and then all of this is, again, anchored to this millinery wire. And I'm sure it's a size 19, which is the most popular millinery wire that people use, and it's what we've been using. That's the weight of the wire that we use in this class. And then this is floral tape that's wrapping around the millinery wire to give it the green look. You can get floral tape in a florist shop. This is what floral tape looks like, and it's wonderful because it can stretch and move. Remember what this looks like, because on our final exam I asked what floral tape is, and you can't deny that you have seen it right here in River City. actually in Greensboro. So here we go. Also look at the flowers on this period hat. These are all kinds of flowers that, like what I was just showing you, only these are on an authentic period hat. These are all fabric, taffeta that is cut out into the shape of petals. And you can see how glorious it all can look. And then it has some ribbon trim on the back, and the ribbon trim has been shaped into a bow. Lovely, lovely, lovely. We're going to be talking about straw hats very briefly in another segment, but here we can savor the look of our flowers. I have some ribbon trims. Here's a great ribbon trim out of fabric, and the fabric was double-faced, pillowcase style, and then shaped with a binder, a binder that's put this way. And this creator actually took some millinery wire and put millinery wire inside the base of this so that she could control how this shapes on her hat. And she let me keep it when she left. I mean, I've always thought this was a lovely example of a tailored bow, because sometimes they can get kind of wonky. The whole thing about a really great tailored bow is that it's crisp and clean and sharp. You can see this one, or even when it's gathered in the center and it's pleated or gathered on the sides, it has a crispness to it. And I'm going to just put that right down there so you can see it real close. I was going to say bye, but I found some more examples that I thought might inspire you. So I hate that we're not together, gang. So here is another lovely, lovely tailored bow, and this is out of velvet, and I hope you can see it fairly close. I'm going to put it down on the table, and maybe she can, show the contrast of it. It might just look like a blob. Actually, if I turn it upside down, maybe it looks better upside down. Maybe you can see some depth to it. And here is a cockade, a fabulous cockade, and I think you can see how that's being made, right? They've actually taken and sewn this color onto a wider grosgrain. This person has created a pattern and then left the rust ribbon as a decoration in the center. It's really quite lovely. Again, I have some handouts that will get you started in that direction if you're interested in it. The secret to something like this is pressing it with the iron as you go along. Hopefully you have an iron at home. But again, who has irons these days? I don't. I don't keep one at my house. But if you guys have an iron, that might be one that you want to attempt. Here is, I've always loved this one. You can see how exciting this is because the ribbon is striped. And so look at the glorious design. Just because you've used striped ribbon, this is the actual ribbon itself, but look at the fabulous kind of shapes and style you can get from that. This is one that's more like what I call a Christmas bow, a December holiday bow. And this is just, ribbon, but it's got wide ribbon. And this is the kind of ribbon that has wire on it. It'll stay stiff and it'll shape in the way you want it. She used some smaller ribbon to tie around there so that it has a kind of delicacy to it. And it's all based on a buckram background. So save your buckram scraps. And I think that's enough to get you going, especially with the handouts. And just, call me. Probably email me is better. Let me help when I can. Now I'm going to say ciao.